Hello, Spiritual Queens, and welcome to another one of my Spiritual Queens Badass podcast episodes. I am so grateful to have you here today. And joining us today on the podcast, we have the wonderful Erin Claire Jones. So, Erin, if you don't know, uses human design to help thousands of individuals and companies step into their work and their lives as their truest selves and to their highest potential. Her work as a guide, coach, and speaker has attracted a growing community of over 250,000 people who turn to her teachings for practical tools, digestible tips, and deeper self knowledge they can access to live with greater ease and authenticity every single day. Welcome to the show, Erin. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, thank you. I'm so excited to chat today. And thank you so much for sending me through my little PDF document as well. It was so interesting to learn all about my human design and see all, it's so accurate, isn't it? It's wild how I've always been into numerology and astrology, but human design's like a whole new, like, kind of treasure trove of wow, like, there's all this incredible to this. So, obviously, we're going to dive into all of that goodness, Erin, later on. But before we get into what human design is and all the goodness with that, when did you spiritually awaken? What's your story?
I don't feel like for me there was like one moment. I feel like there's always been such a spiritual curiosity. I remember even in high school, I was like seeking out like the Shambhala centers where I lived, and then like in college, like looking for meditation retreats wherever I could find them. And so I think that my spiritual practice and awareness has taken many different forms over the course of my life, from meditation to a lot of ceremony and psychedelics to Kundalini. And I would say, in the current iteration of life I am in right now, I feel like so much of my practice is honestly found through my daughter and having a baby and birth. I mean, birth was like the most spiritual experience of my entire life. And so I think that I've always just been curious and letting it take whatever form feels fitting for the moment. But I don't
Mm,
remember a version of myself where it was not with me.
I love that. And you're birthing a book now as well, aren't you? And another baby.
Book and another baby. I'm just the year of birth. So I'm going with it. I'm at a very fertile moment in my life, and I am just creating all the things I can.
Well, I'm very excited to hear about the book and see what comes of that. So I'm sure you're having so much fun writing that and being in that kind of birthing portal, so to speak, in many forms. But it's
Yeah.
interesting you say that, it's always been a part of you because as you can imagine, here on the podcast, we get so many different guests say all sorts of different answers. But it's
Yeah.
amazing when you can speak to those and kind of learn from those who it's always just been there, whether it's been like a little niggling or maybe a family
Yeah.
member that kind of been spiritual or introduce them to those topics. So
Yeah.
I love that. So
Yeah.
how did you get into human design? How did you get into the business that you're in today? Take us through that
Ah,
journey.
oh my gosh, it was not the plan. I think that I was living in New York City in 2015. I was consulting for a number of different companies, and I was kind of in the tech startup world, but on the side, I was like doing my shamanic Reiki training and, all of these other things because I was so curious about all these modalities. But anyways, I was in the startup world, and I was at a gathering, and a stranger came up and asked if he could read my human design chart. And I had never heard of human design, but I was open, as I am to most things, and he gave me the most accurate, insightful reading I had ever received in my life. And he ended that conversation by saying, Erin, I think you're meant to do this. And I think that we should do it together, because he'd been studying the system for a decade. And so I got this like really direct and intense serendipitous invitation into studying human design. And it's funny looking back, because this was at a time almost 10 years ago now that human design was not cool. It was not popular. No one I knew what it was, but there was just something about it that was just like, it felt so right. And so I didn't say yes immediately, but as he started to really expose me to different parts of the system and how it could be used in business and relationships, like my mind was just blown.
Mm.
So I dropped everything I was doing, and went all in with him. And there were many journeys. I ended up going off on my own 2 years later, but that's how it all started.
I love that. And I suppose, starting 10 plus years ago in the spiritual world, training in Reiki, like you said, spirituality as a whole was so taboo. I don't know about in the States,
Yeah.
but here in the UK, nobody spoke about it. When I started 8 years ago now, like honestly, manifestation was like, what are you on about? Like, are you mad? What is this? So how was it for you stepping into the spiritual world when it really was taboo and not spoken about and seen a bit kind of kooky and weird?
Yeah, well, I will say, like, on a personal level, I feel so grateful for my parents because my parents they were not in that world at all, but they were always like, "Erin's doing so many weird things, but, like, she seems really happy." You know what I mean? And, like, is really seems to be enjoying life, so, like, we're just gonna let her do her thing. So I felt like I never felt judged for it at any point in my life, which I'm just grateful for. As a mother now, I'm like, that would be so hard to feel not permission from people that I love so much. But in terms of work, it was hard, and it was especially hard because our exclusive focus early on in the business was human design for business. So we were not just like targeting the masses, we were targeting like corporations, we're like, let us bring the most mystical system that no one has heard of to like companies that like are probably not going to be the first people to jump on the bandwagon. So I would say that I would say it was hard, and also it required a lot of faith and resilience for me because I was receiving no external recognition that what I was doing actually had any legs, and yet I couldn't stop doing it. Like, I couldn't stop learning, I couldn't stop listening, like, it was just, like, there was a part of me that was like, "Just don't stop, like, someday people might see you, and it's not gonna be immediate, and it's not gonna be right now, but they will." And it's so funny now because I look at my human design chart, and my human design chart is so much about being on the cutting edge of things and kind of being seen as a freak often because I just see things before others do, and I'm, like, trying to get people to listen, and they just don't at first. And so now I'm at a point in my life where I love human design. I've like built an amazing business. I love writing the book, and I can also sense the part of myself that likes to be on the cutting edge of things, and
Mhm.
also knowing that like there's going to be more things that I want to be on the edge of because like as uncomfortable as that place is, it's kind of the most satisfying place for me. And human design is still cutting edge, but just not quite as much as it used to be. So I'm just so curious to see how that like continues to manifest in my life.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting how you can see that in your human design chart and you can kind of recognize that and say, oh, okay, that's why I've always been drawn to doing that. Well, that makes a lot of sense. And thank God you did
Totally.
persevere with it because look, now everybody pretty much
Yeah.
knows what human design is, which is amazing. But for those,
Totally.
if there are any who are like,
Yeah.
what is human design? I've lived under a rock. I don't know what it is. What is human design and how was it first discovered? How did it come about?
Of course. So, human design is a system based on your time, date, and place of birth that reveals your energetic blueprint and how you're wired to thrive. So, think of it as basically an operating manual to you in this life. It's like, how are you designed to make decisions, work best, navigate relationships, navigate parenting? It just gives you your own unique roadmap to finding flow. And I think so often we get stuck because we try to emulate what others have done, thinking it will work for us too. And then we feel bad when it doesn't work for us. And I think human design reminds us that we're all so different. And it just gives us language and framework and practices to really know how to honor and kind of work with those differences. In terms of how it was discovered, it's been around since 1987, so it's relatively new. That said, it draws from a lot of very ancient systems, so it's standing on the legs of many, many systems that came before. But it came through in a very mystical way. The founder's name was Ra Uhuruhu. He's no longer alive, but in 1987, he had a mystical experience in Ibiza where he was walking home one night and heard a voice. And the voice basically said, "It's time to work." And so for 8 days and 8 nights, he channeled the system, meaning, I'm sure many of your listeners know, he received all this information, didn't even know where it was coming from, but kind of received this information that this was a new system that brought together so many old systems like astrology and the I Ching and the Kabbalah and the chakra system to give us this blueprint into how we are designed to operate best. And so he spent the next 20 years building it out. And now it's kind of blown up because now a lot of people are communicating about it and sharing it in new ways. But that's how it all started.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
And I love that it combines all those kind of old school systems that we were using as well, whilst
Yeah.
also bringing that newness to it. It's really fascinating when you dive into it and read all the different aspects of your chart. And yeah, it's so fascinating. And I feel like there's
Endlessly.
so much we probably don't know about human design as well that is still to be uncovered. It's just,
Totally.
yeah, so much information. But
Yeah.
how can we use our human design to manifest our dreams? How can it tie into us using manifestation in our life?
I think it honestly just helps us know how we can live in alignment and therefore create whatever we want in our lives, whether that's going to be learning that like you're somebody who's meant to just go after things and pursue every vision you see, whether it's really trusting your gut to kind of guide every next step, whether it's somebody like you who is really meant to like be a leader for many and like not really here to kind of do all the doing, and somebody who's meant to like move into things slowly and not be super rash. Like it just gives us all these tools to kind of navigate each moment in a way that ensures we're living in our fullest alignment. And I will say one thing, and I know we talked about this briefly before we started recording. There are parts of our design, and this is not from the original coming through of human design, it's a more newfangled interpretation that can talk about how we are designed to kind of best work with our visions and what we see. And you and I are opposite, even though we're similar types. And I'm just curious how that's shown up for you. So for me, I would be what we call a non-specific manifestor in the context of human design, which means that it's a little bit harder for me to be incredibly specific about what I want. And it is more effective to kind of connect to the broader goals. And so when I think about discovering human design, I obviously wasn't like, I want to discover human design, but I do remember, a year before I discovered human design being like, I want to be on the cutting edge of something. I want to like bring something new into the world. I had no idea what form it would take. And it came in the form of an invitation, which is what my human design is like, you're just here to be invited in and recognized. So like when I look back, that's just kind of how it all manifested, and not because I tried, because it just happened. Whereas for you, you're somebody who might actually enjoy this specific, which makes sense given the work that you do, might enjoy the specific pieces of like, what do I want to create? Like, what are the specifics? Can I hone in on the details? And of course, things might look different and might be greater and bigger than you imagine. But I think it just gives us so many cool ways to really know how to engage with our path that opens up kind of the biggest opportunities for us.
Mm. And yeah, when I found out when I was a specific manifestor, I thought, actually, that really surprised me. But what you've just shared there, I'm like, yeah, obviously I'm a specific manifestor. Like, of course
Clearly.
I am. Like, yeah, of course I am. So it does make sense. But I think my problem is I'm almost too specific sometimes. And I'm
Right.
like, right, as a Virgo, like it's got to be like this, it's got to be like
Right.
that. That's where it goes too far. So I think I
Yeah,
can definitely be too specific sometimes and have learned to, let go with that and surrender. But yeah,
totally.
it's really funny how it shows up.
Yeah, and like another example for you is like, and this is from a part of your design called the profile, like you're somebody who also like communities are a really important part of your life. And so opportunities are really meant to merge with the people that you know. And so knowing that also allows you to really like work with that. It's like, okay, like my friends might be my clients. My friends are going to create opportunities. So like how can I just like be with my friends knowing that like they're going to be such a amplifier for me in every single way. So I think it helps us be a little bit more specific about where we direct our energy.
Absolutely. So, Erin, what are some common misconceptions with human design? Do you kind of hear any familiar things that people say to you when they first come across it? How can we get it wrong sometimes?
Yeah, of course. And also as with all systems, human design is filtered through the person you're learning from. And so people are going to have really different approaches to the system. I would say one misconception I see, which is because of the way that I interpret human design, is that I think sometimes people look and they're like, "Oh, like I'm a manifestor and therefore I can't date this person, or I'm a projector and therefore I can't work at this job." And like and some human design teachers will say that. I really firmly believe that human design is not meant to tell us what we can or cannot do. It just lets us know how we can do that thing best. So everybody can be a manager, CEO, leader, but like they're going to lead in different ways based on their design. You can partner with every type, and some might be harder than others, but like it just requires that you understand your differences. So I think that that's a big misconception around like human design is not here to tell you what you cannot do. It just lets you know how to do that thing in a way that's actually going to work for you. I think another one, I mean, honestly, there are so many specific misconceptions, as you can imagine, a lot of misunderstandings around what things mean. Um, but I think another one that comes up is in human design, there are different types, and the majority of the population make up one of two types: generators or manifesting generators. And sometimes I have people come to me and they're like, okay, like I'm this type that makes it the majority. Therefore, like I'm not unique and I'm not nuanced. And it can feel like disempowering at first. And I just have to remind them, as with everybody, our type is just our first piece. Like
Mm,
the PDF I sent you, there are 400 plus thousand versions of what that can look like for each person, because the type is one small piece of your entire design. And so it's also knowing that, like, yes, there's this one part of your design, but there's so much more underneath it. And it's so worth taking the time to dive into it. So those are a few, but there are a bajillion.
I agree with that so much. And I've got the funniest story to tell you. I remember a few
Yeah,
years ago, a coaching client reached out and applied, and she said, "Oh, I see that you're a manifestor, and I only want to work with a manifestor coach.
yeah.
So, like, let's have a call." And I thought, oh no, she's talking about human design. She thinks that because I'm a manifestation teacher, I'm a manifester, when obviously I use the term manifester to manifest. And I've got my astrology and my human design and my
Okay.
numerology on my about page. So I thought, oh no, I'm going to have to break it to her. So we have the discovery call. And she was like, I just really love your energy, Emma. I really want to work with you because you're a manifester. And I said, can I just check? Do you mean human design? And she was like, yeah. And I was like, oh, I'm really sorry to tell you, I'm a projector. And she was like, oh no, this is not going to work. I do not want to work with a projector. Absolutely not. And I was like, okay then, thank you. And we didn't work together. And I thought, oh my God, I've been judged. I've been judged by my human design.
I know. I know it's such an interesting thing. Like it's so useful. And I've had people be like, Erin, build a dating app, build a matchmaking business app. And I'm like, I don't know. Because like I just think there's something the way that I recommend using it is like I would say like if that person is drawn to you and like feels really drawn to you and they feel all that magnetism, like they've got to just trust that
Yeah.
after they've decided you're the right fit, then they look at your design and then they're like, okay, now how can I best work with you? And there's obviously some nuance. If you're a projector like you and I, like it might be hard to be coached by a manifesting generator if they only are going to expect everyone to be like manifesting generators. But if they have like a lot of awareness that not everyone's going to be like them and they take the time to kind of really understand that, it can be like such an empowering experience for us. So I always say, like, trust who you're drawn to, then use human design to figure out how to work with them best. That is a
Amen.
hilarious story. Yeah.
I
You're
haven't
like,
had it.
okay. Yeah. What a strange rejection. Yeah.
So, how can we get started with human design and empower ourselves, Erin?
The first place to start is to look it up. You need your time, date, and place of birth. You can look it up at humandesignblueprint.com. The chart itself is not super visually pleasing nor intuitive, but you'll see that next to it is a list of qualities. And that's what you want to look at. Look at your type, look at your strategy, look at your authority. These are the three pieces of your design that will tell you how to use your energy most effectively, how to create opportunities, and how to make decisions. And just start learning about those. You know, I share a lot for free on Instagram. We have a free intro class. You can download a free summary. So I would say start there. I do have an offering which I sent you called the Blueprint Guide, which basically is a book all about you. So if you're like, okay, Erin, just like tell me how I can use my human design in my own life, that's definitely the place. It's hyper personalized, totally custom to you, and you can use the discount code Spiritual Queen. But that's a really good place to start. And honestly, what I would say, what I love about human design most is that, and this is how I try to present it as well and share it, is like it's not very jargony or like scientific in its language. It really is so resonant with people. Like I feel like even the most skeptical people are just like, this just makes sense. Like I'm not telling them anything new. I'm just giving them a language for things they've always known. And so I imagine that when people start to read their charts, they'll just feel like it will feel very familiar. It won't be like I'm teaching you anything new. You're just having a stranger on the internet actually give you language for things you've always experienced and hopefully give you even more permission to step into it.
Mm. And I remember like the first time I read my human design, I had like a little, basically what you're describing there, a little kind of PDF. And I was like, oh my gosh, like it was so much more in depth than astrology and so much more in depth than anything I'd read before. And
Yeah.
it really made sense to like little behaviors that I had in the past or little like quirks I had. And I was
That's
like, oh my
crazy.
God, I feel so seen right now. Like they know all my little bad habits and all my good habits.
I think that's the best part though, is I think it just makes us feel really seen. And I think
Mm,
that's really empowering. I think people like have it on their bedside table and just read it every morning and be like, yeah, this is who I am. And I know for me, when I hit a lot of roadblocks or I'm feeling a lot of frustration or resistance in my life, I'll go back to my design and it's just very clear why. I'm like,
mm.
oh yeah, I'm resisting all these pieces or I'm trying to be a thing that I'm not. And so it just keeps returning us to ourselves over and over again.
Yeah. And I really think it helped me focus in my business as well because I only really knew
Yeah.
my chart maybe like a year or two ago. So obviously I'd been running my business for a long time before that. But as soon as I found out that community was such a big part of my chart, I was like, okay, that makes sense why I'm building a membership. That makes sense why I'm building a community here and on Instagram and things. So it really helped me to give focus to, right, I really want to focus on the community side of things. That's where I feel
Yeah.
my biggest joy. Clearly it's in my chart. It's meant to be. And
All
when
over
I
your
did
chart.
that, when I did that, it hugely took off as well. So I think even that's really helped me to home in on where I wanted to put my energy, where I didn't necessarily know before.
Yes, exactly. And I think it just goes back to your question around how we can use it to best manifest. Like it just helps us know where to focus. Like community is such a big part of your design that like if you invest there, like the impact is going to be so huge in a way you probably could never have imagined. But because you already know yourself, you are already doing it. And human design just served to validate that like you're on the right path and your intuition is something to trust.
Love that. So, what are your top tips for each type? If you could give any words of wisdom, what would they be?
Okay, so I would say for a manifesting generator, you are multi-passionate by nature, and that's just not going to make sense to some people. They aren't going to understand why you are a podcast host and also opening a juice bar and also like doing your Pilates certification. Like, and it just doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't need to make sense to others. So I would say you will likely not feel satisfied unless you do have these kind of varied passions and things you're investing in. So I would just give yourself permission to stop making sense to others and just start following what excites you and just trust that like it might make sense later. But like if something is exciting you and pulling you there, it's enough reason to follow it. I would say for generators, you have so much capacity and so much energy. And because of that, it can be really easy for people to take advantage of it and just want you to be involved in everything because you are so resourced. But I would remind you that when you are lit up and excited by what you're doing, that's when the energy emerges. When you are pulled in a bajillion different directions, it will drain your battery so quickly. And so prioritizing your own satisfaction is not a selfish choice. It's the most generous choice you can make for yourself and other people because your energy can be so uplifting for others. I think as projectors for you and me, I think that you just carry so many gifts beyond how much you can accomplish and how much you can do. You are so perceptive and so insightful and can really transform people with your perspective and how you see. And so I would just try on this idea that it's not about working so hard and every hour and not taking breaks. It's about just like giving yourself space and rest and pause and like maybe it's a 2 hour day, three, whatever it is, it might be a traditional job or not, but just knowing that there's so much that comes alive for you when you really allow yourself to be rested and relaxed and not try to be productive all the time. Do you feel that as a projector?
Yes, I do. I do.
Okay, me too. Okay. Um, and as a manifester, I would say you are such a disruptive force, and your biggest gift is starting things and not finishing them. So I would just think about areas where maybe you felt guilty for not like following through or completing everything because your energy is at the beginning. Like you're so good at kickstarting a new idea and then handing it off and freeing your energy up for the next idea to initiate. So I would just try on this idea that like the beginning is where you thrive and notice if there are any areas where you haven't allowed that. And then for reflectors, there's so much to say for all of them, of course, but for reflectors, I would say your space makes such a difference in the quality of your life. When you plant yourself in the right cities, homes, cafes, tables at restaurants, hotel rooms, you make yourself available for the right experience. And so I would encourage you to be quite high maintenance. Maybe you don't like that word, meticulous, just just have strong preferences about your space. If a space doesn't feel right, it's enough reason to leave. If it does feel right, it's enough reason to stay. And so I would just trust that being in the right space brings out your most aligned expression and will pull so many aligned opportunities your way.
I love that. Great tips. Thank you, Erin. And I feel
My
like as well,
pleasure.
like understanding being a projector was learning to wait for the invitation. And I was
Oof,
like,
yeah.
oh my God. Like, because I'm always like, oh, let me help you. Have you tried this? Or have you done that? Like, I'm always the friend who's like, oh, I know exactly what to do for that. And then learning to wait for the invitation. Oh, was that a big lesson for you too?
Oh my God, yeah. I think that, and just like for projectors to know, like projectors naturally see and sense so much. So it's very natural, like you said, to want to share it all. It's like, oh my God, I can see how you could make this better. Oh my God, I see why this is not working in your life. But unless you're invited in, unless people are ready to hear it, it will just go over their head and it will make you feel so bitter and resentful. And so I think learning that I was meant to be invited felt very scary at first. And I've learned that it really is just a tool to protect my energy and to conserve my energy and to make sure that I'm only sharing it in the places where people like really want to hear it. They're going to act on it, they value it. And that's made such a difference in my life. I remember growing up with my manifestor sister who basically is not here to be told what to do in any way. And I would just be like, do this. Oh my God, this would change your life. And she was like, I'm so angry. So like it was such a transformational lesson in our relationship to be like, it's not that she doesn't well, no, she doesn't want to hear. And if she does want to hear, she will let me know. And like, there are these simple changes that can really change your relationships, because you might just be not really honoring somebody else, or honestly honoring your own energy and the way that you're meant to share.
So, so important. And
Yeah.
talking about relationships, I heard you speak on Danny Morell's podcast recently about children's human design, and how, as a parent, obviously knowing your child's human design is really important to like deepen and strengthen that relationship. So, in your words, Erin, why is it important that we know our children's human design? Like, how can it blossom that, connection and deepening with you both?
Two things come to mind. I think the first piece is that there's so much friction that can arise in relationships when we expect someone to be different than what they are. And I think, and or more similar to us. And so human design helps us understand how different each person is and how we can honor them. My daughter, who's 18 months old, is a totally different design than me. If I was like trying to be like, oh, I've got a little projector child and like she's going to operate this way, like it just wouldn't work out, because she's just like so different than I was. And I'm so entertained and in love with it, because I don't need her to be like me. I love how different she is. So I think in a case like that, it just like creates so much empathy and compassion. And it just expands our minds, because we're like, oh, I might like to be asked questions in this way and treated in this way. And like, it doesn't mean it's going to be true for her. And I think human design has been such a reminder from the minute she was born to be like, it's okay that she's different. And like, let me just see how she evolves and give her space for that. I think the other reason it's important is that my experience when I sit with people is when I share their human design and they feel like they're not living it, they'll look back to when they were 4 or 5 or 3 or whatever. And they're like, I was so living it then. Like, I find that kids are living their design so purely in the best cases, where we're in a nurturing environment. But then as we grow up, we often get really conditioned out of it. We're like, oh, we've got to do it this way. We've got to do it this way. And then like later in life, we come back to it and we're like, oh, wait, this is actually is the right way to work. I always knew. So I think that if you're able to kind of stop that pattern and give kids permission to be who they are from day one, and like allow them to sustain that throughout the life, like it's going to be a better experience. So I think you give kids so much permission to be who they are. And I think that is obviously the biggest gift that human design can give us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, if anybody knows their human design, or maybe they ordered their blueprint from you and they're like,
Yeah.
this is all great, Erin, how can we then kind of, I guess, like, what are some kind of practical things that we can then do to bring it into our life, take those next steps once we know the kind of overall blueprint of our life of human design?
Yeah, so I think my favorite part of human design is that it doesn't just give us information, it gives us tools. So I would just play with like the key pieces of your design, like treat it as an experiment. Say as a projector, you're like, okay, I'm a projector. I'm not here to do all the time. So what happens if I implement like a few moments during the day where I just like put everything away and I give myself a moment to take a break and rest, and like I have no need to be productive? What changes? How different do I feel? Knowing that you're here to be invited in. It's like, what if I just like don't force any opportunities for a week and just like trust that my energy is doing enough, and see who invites me in and see how different those
Mhm.
experiences feel versus the ones that I chased after. You're somebody who's not meant to be fast in your decisions. So like, what if for a week you just give yourself a moment to pause before you say yes, and see if you're still excited the next day and the day after that? So I think there are so many little ways that we can start to experiment and see, does this way actually work for us? Because once it does, then it kind of just becomes like a second nature. Like, yes, I sleep on my decisions and I wait to be invited into opportunities. But I think I would encourage people at the outset just to try, see what happens. Like, don't believe me, like try it for yourself and see if it actually works for you. Like, if somebody feels like they want to be a different design and it's really working for them, I will never tell them to stop doing it. If it's working for you, like that's enough. If you feel good, that's like all I want. So but I would choose a few pieces and just start playing with them and see what happens.
I love that. So, Erin, my last question to you today then is, what is one piece of life advice that you'd like to leave my lovely listeners with?
I think that I would say, whether or not you choose to dive deeper into human design, I think what it teaches us is that we are all so different. And so I think one piece of advice is just really, or I guess one question I would encourage is just to reflect on where in your life you were expecting someone else to be more similar to you. Like, are you disappointed somebody's not moving as fast as you, not as insightful as you, isn't doing as much, whatever it is, and just consider like, is it because they're meant to do it differently? Because again, like I said, so much friction arises when we just like want somebody to be different than what they are. And so again, human design is not the only modality to help us move through this, but I would just think about that, because I think the more we accept our differences, the more we embrace them, the closer and more connected we become. So it's just worth considering.
Yes, absolutely. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. So, Erin, where can my lovely listeners find you if they want to learn more about your work, get their blueprint, give us all the details of where we can find you?
Yes, of course. So on Instagram, I'm at Erin Claire Jones and at Human Design Blueprint. And if you want to just look up your human design, you can get a free summary. That's all at humandesignblueprint.com. And if you want to get your blueprint and guide and you're like, I would like a book all about me, then that's at humandesignblueprint.com/guide.
Amazing. And we will link all of that below with the code Spiritual Queen as well. So you can go and grab yours today. But thank you so much, Erin, for coming on. Honestly, I've learned so much from this conversation. So I know everybody listening is going to be busy looking at their human design charts and integrating that into their life. So thank you so much for sharing all of your pearls of wisdom with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.